There have been a number of protests in the past few years related to certain chemical plants. Protests against production of the chemical PX or paraxylene have made international news. It's a major material for the textile industry. It's used in the production of plastics, polyester fiber, and thin film. The chemical is also considered highly toxic. Many fear that a PX plant will lead to environmental and health hazards. The escalation of this fear is less about PX than it is about the greater demand for environmental and health standards. Issues of gross negligence have led to a certain amount of distrust and thus protests. PX projects have led to protests in 5 large Chinese cities: Kunming, Chengdu, Dalian, Ningbo, and Xiamen. Concessions were made on the plants in all of the cities besides Chengdu. Chengdu's plants was further along in its development, which might have been a factor in the decision. The most recent protest was in Kunming. This past March, local media exposed a PX project related to an oil refinery in Anning, not far from Kunming. Kunming is the capital of the Yunnan province. When the news was released, thousands of local residents gathered in downtown Kunming to express their opposition to the project. Since there have been a number of protests, that means there must also be a number of plants being constructed. The construction of the plants is rooted in the huge demand for chemical treatment of textiles. At present, the synthetic fibers have accounted for 70% of textile production. Polyester fiber using PX takes up over 80% of the total synthetic fiber production. In 2010, China became the world's largest PX producer and consumer. Its output accounted for about 20% of total global production. It consumed about 32% of global PX production. China's PX capacity had surged from 2.7 million tons in 2005 to about 8 million tons in 2010. It then surpassed the United States to become the world's largest PX producer. In recent years, there's a sign that China has gradually increased its PX imports. In 2012, China's PX capacity was 8.8 million tons, while imported PX took up about 6.3 million tons. The high dependency on PX imports led to its rising prices. Recently, a domestic fiber enterprise showed that the price of imported PX rose by $200 per ton. Data showed that in July this year, the average price of imported PX was about $1,400 per ton. In August, the Japanese PX producer JX Holdings set their price at about $1,510 per ton. The PX price from South Korea's S-Oil Total Lubricants was just about $10 more than JX Holdings per ton. Although the price of imported PX kept rising, the PX imports still increased by about 34% in June this year from last year. The price rises have clearly led to demand to build more plants domestically. Naturally, this meant that there would be more pressure to build the plants. So considerations for the environmental effects were rationalized. An article from China Economic Net argued the environmental benefits of using PX. It pointed out estimates that each 10,000 tons of synthetic fiber is equivalent to about 11,000 acres of cotton output. This means that 6.3 million tons of PX imports last year had saved about 33 million acres of cotton land. The point is moot if there is a toxic spill in the water supply, though. The cost of cleanup would be enormous. Also, the toll taken on the healthcare system would be a massive burden. Don't go away because we'll continue to look at controversial chemical plants. Stay tuned.